Hi there. Welcome to my FlossTube video. I'm Jean Farish, and once again, I am so glad that you're here with me. We just finished our American traditional Thanksgiving weekend, and one of the things that, of course, I think we all spend time doing is thinking about those things for which we are the most grateful. And you all came to mind when I was reflecting on this particular holiday, because I am ever so grateful to have you in my life. I thought about this weekend is one of the things that's changed the most about our industry is that this whole internet experience, even though it's not really face-to-face, it's about as close to face-to-face as we're going to get for a good long while. And it has brought me so much closer to the people who love what I love. Back in 1981, when I started my company, designers would go to trade shows once or twice a year. And as the years went on, sometimes more frequently than that. But my point being that when we had these trade shows, that was an opportunity to interact directly with shop owners. And unless the designer went to a store to teach or to have a trunk show or book signing or whatever, we rarely got to interact in any kind of meaningful way with the people who would stitch our designs. And with this FlossTube episode thing, and with stitching groups on Facebook and other things, the internet has, in its own way, allowed designers to interact more directly with the people who stitch the things that we design. And I appreciate your comments so much. They inspire me. They give me insight as to what you're looking for and the sort of questions that you have. And so I'm just, again, Thanksgiving weekend just really brought to mind how thankful I am to have this kind of a relationship with you, even though it's a virtual one. It seems awfully real, though, to me, and I hope it does to you, too. So the other thing that I thought about a lot this weekend, because once Thanksgiving is over, we do start decorating our home for Christmas. And in putting up the Christmas tree, I just brought so many memories as I hung certain ornaments on the tree, and I want to share those with you now. Some of the cross-stitch ornaments that I hang on our tree are things that I designed and stitched myself. And so here's one that means a lot to me. This is part of my Angelic Friends series. So that's one. And there are a couple that I didn't design and I didn't stitch, but they have so much meaning for me in that they were part of this wonderful community of stitchers that did a fundraising thing for Habitat for Humanity. This was back in the 90s when we had Spirit of Cross Stitch festivals, and we invited attendees to bring finished ornaments to the show. No matter how simple or how intricate the stitching, they were all priced the same, and I think it was $5. And so people gave of themselves in two ways. One was by stitching and finishing and bringing ornaments to contribute to this sale, but also and then buying ornaments to take home with them. And I always found a couple that I had to bring home with me because they just really touched my heart, and they have graced my tree ever since then. And this one is one that I did design, although in this case I did not stitch this one, because one of the other things that I did was I would include in our promotional material one design that I came up with that people had the option of stitching. They certainly weren't limited to bringing in ornaments that were stitched from this design, but if they did, then that was wonderful too. And I always looked for one that I could add to my collection as well. So one of the things I decided to do is I'm going to rechart this, and I will put it on my blog website, jeanfarishneedleworks.com, and it will be there for you to download and stitch at your leisure, whether you Whether you get it stitched for this Christmas or not doesn't really matter. And I will include the full range of numbers so that you can put the date of any year on there. And it's one that you can stitch from your stash. I will make some suggestions for colors, but feel free to use any kind of color combination that you just happen to have on hand. And by the way, a little stitching note or some stitching advice: if you are stitching on perforated paper, keep in mind that you will not be able to wash your project when it's finished. And when you're stitching with this much white, it really is important to start with clean hands every time you sit down to stitch. In fact, I would probably get up every once in a while if you're stitching for any amount of time, a couple of hours or whatever, and stop and wash your hands in between. No matter how careful you think you are being, we all have oil, just natural oils that are in our bodies, and they will come out on the white. So that's just one little bit of advice that I will give you. And by the way, these are available in my Etsy store. There are 2 sets of 4 girls angels and 1 set of little boy angels. So each set has 4, so there's 12 altogether. And you can just pick and choose between the 3 groups. And so yeah, they're there in my Etsy store now. Those ornaments came to mind when answering 2 questions recently. This is one that Eileen sent in. She said, I'm YouTube taught, which I find kind of humorous. We were talking about being self-taught, and she identifies herself as being YouTube taught, which is, certainly the way many of us are learning things. Oh, I have a story to tell you about that, but let me finish about Eileen first. So she said, as I told you previously, I just started to cross stitch. I've actually completed 2 charts, and I'm working on my 3rd, which, as an aside, I will that's pretty great for a brand new stitcher. So she has 2 kitted up. One is the Hearts Come Home at Christmas. And she said, I find myself wanting to do them all. However, I'm trying to do one at a time so I can gain confidence as I do larger and more difficult pieces. I have found that cross stitch is a relaxing and stress-reducing craft that I can do during any downtime while at work. Eileen has certainly discovered one of the great things about cross stitch, and that is that unless you are stitching with an elaborate setup, it's very portable. By the way, that's one of the reasons I stitch in hand. Not to say that's the only way. Keep in mind, hoops and small Q-snaps are also portable. But if you're one who has like a floor frame and your setup is clearly not portable, I would really advise you or encourage you to also think of having a more portable project that you can take along. And again, oh man, I keep saying, life is just so different. I was thinking, like, when you go to ball games or whatever, I've always taken my stitching with me, but I don't go anywhere anymore. So, that's kind of, that's for the future. And I am as optimistic as anyone that at some point in time, we will come back to a new normal. And when we do, I would encourage you to when you have these large, very stationary projects that you're working on, to intersperse them with smaller, more portable things so that when you are out and about, you've got your stitching with you. But as I thought about Eileen's question, I found myself answering this. There's a trend among a group of stitchers who have many, many projects going at once, like 20 or 30 or 40. This leaves many new stitchers with a sense that this is the way to go, and that it is somehow what must be done to be part of this community. For me, this is not normal and is not gratifying or even productive. It's like going to a buffet and loading your plate with everything to the point where you enjoy nothing. And then I put in parentheses, end of rant. So I went on to advise Eileen that she was wise to focus on one project at a time, especially as a beginner, and use it as a way to develop her skills. Now, I think that's especially important when you are learning a new craft, is, work out things like your tension and how to read a chart and how to find your mistakes and how to correct your mistakes. Do that on a single project. If you have several projects on the go, then whatever it is that you are doing that may need a little tweaking or a little improvement, you're going to end up doing them on all your projects. And that just doesn't make sense to me. Now, again, if it makes sense to you, and I'm talking to one of the people at home that has 30 or 40 projects on a go, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, I belong to enough online stitching groups to know that there's almost bragging rights with how many works in progress you have going at any one time. Again, if that's your style of stitching, I don't have a problem with it. It doesn't affect me. Where I am bothered by that are the newbies, the people who are coming back to needlework for the first time in 20 years, or who are picking it up for the very first time, and suddenly they're thrust into this culture that's dominated by people who are constantly talking about how many projects they have going at any one time. So I have a couple projects going right now. I have Jane Hattersley, you know that. I've been working on Hearts Come Home at Christmas to pace myself with a weekly lesson. And I have other small things that I'm working on, but I don't have 30 or 40 things going at any one time. If I did, I would never get anything done. So this is what I would say to people who have large things. Like when we start stitching Jane Hattersley as a group, and I hope you will join us in that endeavor. That won't happen until April, but you know, when we are stitching that, and she's a pretty big girl. So I would say, you know, it's fine to have a couple of small things to be working on. You can get kind of tired of stitching a project that seems to go on forever and ever and ever, that's taking you weeks or months or even years to stitch. And having something to do in between does a couple of things. One is it changes things up enough that when you go back to that larger project, you're going to it with a fresh outlook and you are excited about being reunited with that project. The other thing is that by doing small things in between, you get that sense of accomplishment. If all you're ever doing is stitching and not finishing anything, that can start feeling very, very tedious. And so that's another reason to have a couple of different things on the go. So that's what I shared with Eileen. And if that is something that perplexes you, if you're feeling that you're somehow not keeping up by not having countless projects on the go all at the same time, let me tell you, what you're doing is normal. Don't feel like that you're doing anything wrong by not having 30 or 40 things. So with that said, what do you do when you lose interest in a project? When you fall in love with it and after stitching it for weeks or a couple of months or whatever, you just lose interest? Is it like checking a book out of the library and you read the first chapter and you say, this really isn't for me, and you know, you say, I'm not going to finish reading this book? Well, it's sort of like that and sort of not like that, because with the library book, all you have to do is just take it back and check something else out. With a needlework project, you have probably already invested some money in the supplies, and you certainly have invested some of your time in stitching that project for whatever length of time you have. So what do you do when you fall out of love with a cross-stitch project? Well, the first thing I think I would suggest that you do is just put it aside for a while. Don't bury it. Keep it nearby so that it's, you know, kind of in sight. And start something else that's smaller, and work on that other small project until you're done, and then go back to the other project. And if you're still feeling like you don't want to finish it, then what I would suggest that you do is either give it away or go. There are many what we call de-stash groups on the internet. Find a reliable one and sell it to someone else, or offer it for just the cost of postage or whatever if somebody else wants to adopt it. But don't punish yourself. Don't keep stitching something that you aren't enjoying every stitch, because this is a leisure time hobby. It's not work. It's not something you have to do. It's something you want to do. But when you figure out that it's not something you want to finish, do take the time to ask yourself some really hard questions about why you don't want to finish it. Is it the color scheme? Is it the style? What is it about this project that has caused you to lose interest? And I say spend some quality time doing that, simply so that you don't make that mistake again, because that would really be the sad thing. This is a question from Cleo. She said, I am right now stitching on Aida, but I really want to try an even weave. I want to finish Hearts Come Home for Christmas, which she's obviously stitching on Aida, and then do a small project on some 28 count even weave that she already has. My eyesight is not the best, but I do have a magnifier with a light to use. So my response to Cleo, and to anyone who has the same sentiment, and that is that they wonder if their eyes are good enough to see the linen. Here's what I want you to realize. The holes that you stitch in on linen are not any smaller than the holes in the Aida. In fact, many people are surprised to find that it's easier to stitch on linen in terms of the holes once they learn to read the linen. And remember, I have a little YouTube tutorial that focuses just on how to look at the linen when you're trying to stitch over two, how to read the fabric so you know where to place your cross stitches. Once you start stitching, let's assume for a moment that you're stitching with 2 strands. If you're stitching an area that has kind of solid stitching, in any one hole, you can have 8 threads going into the same hole. That's a lot of thread. Like, let's take a look at this little ornament, which I ran upstairs and took this off the tree so I could use this as an example. So where you have solid stitching like this, in any one hole, you have, this leg of this cross stitch, this one of this one, this leg of this one, this leg of this one, all diving into the same hole. And when you're stitching on an even weave or linen, that hole kind of gets larger as you're stitching into it, which actually makes it easier to stitch than Aida, which by its very nature, the way it's woven, it's woven so there isn't a lot of give. So when you shop for linen in a store, lay it on something dark, and you'll see that the holes are very obvious. They're not, trust me, they're not smaller than the holes on Aida. So when you are ready to start stitching on even weave or linen for the first time, choose your project wisely. First of all, it should be a design that you are absolutely enchanted with, because that will be a big motivating factor in actually stitching it. It should be small enough that you won't feel overwhelmed, large enough that you have the opportunity to practice what it is that you're doing. So something like a scissor case or a pin cushion or an ornament would be a good size. The other thing is things like keeping something dark on your lap, which I always do when I'm stitching on linen. is a big thing to help you see the holes that much better. So if you're one of the people who has not tried linen because you feel like you won't be able to see the holes, if you normally stitch on 14 count Aida, try a 28 count linen over 2, and that still gives you 14 stitches to the inch. I would say even if you're more commonly stitched on, say, 16 count Aida, maybe still go to the 28 count linen to stitch 14 stitches to the inch for the first one. And then I would love to hear feedback from you. Tell me, were the holes really harder to see? Because I don't really think that's the stumbling block. I think it's getting in the habit of seeing the 2 threads crossing 2 threads. That is the barrier to a lot of people feeling like that they can stitch on linen. And yes, I mean, there are incredibly fine linens. There are linens that are, 45 and 50 threads to the inch. That's not where you want to start. Start with something basic. There's some lovely 20 count linens. But if you like good coverage, if you're one of the people who doesn't like to see a lot of ground cloth as you're stitching, then that's another reason to go with like the 28 count linen. So that's a long answer to a short question. I recognize that I can sound very passionate on this topic. And the reason is, if you don't ever want to stitch on linen and you have no interest in it, whatever, that's fine. I'm not out to convert anyone. But if you aren't stitching on linen because you think you can't see it, that's a whole different ball game. Because I'm just, to repeat myself, if you can see the holes on Aida, you can see the holes on linen. They really are not smaller. Oh, also, while I'm thinking about being passionate about things, I know that I can sound very adamant about things. I know that I'm opinionated. I recognize that in myself. So I want to add a footnote to my comments that I made last week about that some people who are left-handed and people who only stitch on Aida had kind of reached out to me and said, kind of like, what about us? I want to make it clear. If I came across as whining, I did not mean to at all. I think that these are legitimate concerns. If I've suddenly found myself in a world where all directions were written for left-handers and I had to kind of translate everything for myself, I would find that frustrating too, especially when you're learning something. I mean, it's enough that you're learning something new without having to overcome the hurdle of those directions being written for a right-hander when you are clearly not. So, yeah, I didn't mean to be complaining. I was mainly trying just to explain what was going on with all that. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that you can learn just about anything on YouTube, and it is true. Without getting into a lot of the particulars, I took my car to a car wash last week. It was a gorgeous day. It was a sort of car wash where you they take the car through the power wash part and then they vacuum the inside and wipe it down. And this company does, they do a good job in general. But on this particular day, whoever did the vacuuming pulled my seat all the way forward and it jammed there. And when I say all the way forward, I had to straddle the steering column getting into the car. I'm 5'2", and it was all I could do to get into the driver's seat of the car. Became a kind of he said, she said thing. You drove the car in here. It was already in that position. No, it wasn't. Yada, yada, yada. It went back and forth. I finally just thought, you know what? I short of feeling like a victim here, I'm not going to win this argument. I'm just going to find another way to solve this problem. And I did. on YouTube, there was a video that showed how to fix a power seat in my model of car when it got jammed in that position. And so for the cost of $2.49 or whatever it was, I bought a number 2 square drill bit and got out my electric drill, and my daughter and I worked together, and I think it took us all of 5 minutes to fix my car seat. And so, yes, you can find just about anything if you want to learn how to do on YouTube. And that made me realize that when I make these videos, when anyone makes these videos, and you at home are watching them as I watched that video, I hope that this guy knew what he was talking about, that what he was demonstrating was valid, and that he was telling me everything I needed to know to be able to fix the seat in my car, and he did. So there's just a huge responsibility on the shoulders, I think, of people who make instructional videos to make sure that they are being fair and complete, and that they have whatever expertise or credentials or whatever to be able to be talking intelligently about whatever subject it is that they're talking about. So you do need to be careful, I think, about that when you are looking at directions. You know, if possible, and what I did also was I looked at 2 or 3 different videos to make sure that if I watched 3 different people fixing the same problem the same way, then that certainly told me that this was legitimate. And I would say the same thing would be true whenever you're trying to learn a needlework technique on YouTube, as we have nicknamed it, FlossTube. I've tried to say this a couple different ways, and I keep sort of stumbling all over myself. So I finally just sat down and wrote down what I wanted to share with you. And so pardon me while I read this to you. This is a decidedly different holiday period, and I hope that you are looking at the long game, making adjustments and sacrifices now for your own good and for the common good. Worldwide, there have been so many losses, and we Americans have suffered our share. Use this time to reflect on what is important to you. Relax and stitch something that brings you pleasure. Focus on what you can do rather than what you cannot do. Peace of mind will bring you peace of heart. The essence of my message is this: regardless of your religious or spiritual beliefs, regardless of your cultural practices, in these coming weeks, celebrate. Find that which allows you to celebrate. Do it safely. Between now and next week, I hope that you stitch happy and stay safe.